The pontificate of Pope Francis has brought profound change to the Catholic Church, signaling the end of an era that lasted centuries and the beginning of a new period marked by transformation and challenges. His election does not merely represent her transition in leadership, but carries a broader significance interpreted by many as a prophetic milestone. Some see in his papacy the fulfillment of ancient predictions, such as those attributed to St. Malachy, which mention a final pope named Petrus Romanus, associated with times of tribulation. Inevitable questions then arise. Could Francis be this final pontiff, or will others still fulfill this role? The answers may lie hidden in signs left throughout history, waiting for the right moment to be fully understood. Various clues, scattered across different times and places, seem to converge toward the same message: the end of a cycle of stability that lasted around 500 years and the beginning of a new phase. One such sign is found on the cloak of the Virgin of Guadalupe, whose image, beyond the words conveyed, holds hidden symbolism. The 46 stars embroidered on her cloak correspond not only to the constellations visible in the sky on the day of her apparition in 1531, but also appear to represent the 46 popes who governed the Church from Paul III to Benedict XVI. Intriguingly, Francis does not fit into this count, as if his pontificate exists beyond this predetermined period, thus marking the start of a new era. Another element reinforcing this interpretation is the prophecy of St. Malachy, which describes a sequence of popes up to a final one identified as Petrus Romanus, who would reign in difficult times. Although Francis is not literally called Peter the Roman, his papacy has been associated with this figure due to his reforms and the global context in which the Church finds itself. Additionally, historical events and private revelations, such as the supposed messages received by 4 girls in a small village, also seem to point to this transition, suggesting that the world has entered a period of trials. All of this leads to reflection on the meaning of this moment. If the pontificate of Benedict XVI represented the closing of a long cycle, that of Francis seems to inaugurate a different phase in which the Church and the world face unprecedented challenges. The signs, whether found in sacred images, prophecies, or revelations, converge toward the same conclusion: we are living in times of change in which judgment and renewal may be closer than we imagine. The lingering question is whether this transition will merely be another stage in history, or if it will indeed mark a definitive turning point, as the ancient predictions suggest. The analysis of the prophetic signs marking Pope Francis's pontificate reveals an impressive convergence of mystical elements. In the background, the famous prophecy attributed to St. Malachy presents a numbered sequence of 111 popes, with Benedict XVI being the last on the list under the motto Gloria Olivae. What is deeply striking is that the next pope, referred to as Petrus Romanus, appears without a number, as if existing outside the established structure. This break in the sequence is not merely coincidental, but powerfully symbolic, suggesting that we have entered a period transcending the traditional ecclesiastical order and stepping into a time of prophetic fulfillment. The absence of numbering for this final pope in the list functions as a celestial sign that known structures are giving way to a new spiritual reality. Complementing this picture, the apparitions at Garabandal in 1961 brought a particularly revealing message. The Virgin reportedly told the visionary Conchita that after the pontificate of John XXIII, only 3 regular popes and one of brief duration would remain before the beginning of the end times. It is crucial to understand that this concept, as clarified by the visionary herself, does not refer to the final apocalypse, but rather to a period of divine warning marked by a great miracle and spiritual corrections. Historical sequence confirmed this prediction with precision. Paul VI, John Paul I of short pontificate, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. With the election of Francis, this prophetic period seems to have effectively begun. When we cross-reference these 3 lines of revelation, the cloak of Guadalupe with its 46 stars popes, the prophecy of St. Malachy with its interrupted numbering, and the messages of Garabandal with its precise count of pontificates, we arrive at an inevitable conclusion. We are living in a time of unprecedented spiritual transition. Francis does not merely succeed Benedict XVI in office, but appears to inaugurate a qualitatively different phase in the history of the Church and the world. Theologians and scholars of prophecies emphasize that this period will likely include what they call the warning, a direct divine intervention in which each person will have an intimate encounter with the truth of their own life in the light of God's presence. This would be followed by a great miracle visible to all, intended to awaken consciences. The gravity of the current moment lies in the fact that, according to these same prophetic traditions, if there is no genuine conversion after these extraordinary signs, a time of more intense purification would follow. This perspective should not be interpreted as fatalism, but as an urgent call to reflection and spiritual renewal. What makes this analysis particularly relevant is how different prophetic lines originating in diverse times and contexts converge to point to our present time as a decisive period. Whether through numerical symbolism, counts of pontificates, or mystical messages, the emerging picture is one of humanity approaching a critical point in its spiritual journey, where collective and individual choices will carry even greater weight in the unfolding of events. The motto attributed to what would be the last pope in St. Malachi's prophecy, Petrus Romanus, presents a somber and deeply prophetic description. The text does not speak of a triumphant pontiff, but rather of a shepherd who will guide the church amid suffering and tribulation. The prophecy clearly states that after his reign, Rome will be destroyed. But here arises a crucial question: what exactly does Rome signify? Mystics like Anna Catherine Emmerich offer a profound interpretation. The fall of Rome would not first and foremost be a physical event, but a spiritual one. She predicted that the city would lose its faith, embrace religious syncretism, and abandon its sacred doctrine, signs of an inner decay that would precede its possible material ruin. Today, many see these signs unfolding before our eyes: the erosion of orthodoxy, doctrinal confusion, and the weakening of Catholic identity in a secularized world. Is Francis the Petrus Romanus? Three possible interpretations. The first, and most direct interpretation, is that Pope Francis is indeed Petrus Romanus. He was the first pontiff to assume office outside the symbolic cycle of the 46 stars on the cloak of Guadalupe, and has governed during a period of intense turbulence both within and outside the Church. His pontificate has been marked by divisions, scandals, and an unprecedented crisis of authority. If this view is correct, his departure from the papal scene could mark the beginning of an even more critical time in which traditional ecclesiastical structures collapse, giving way to a period of purification. The second interpretation, proposed by Father Juan Manuel Rigartua, suggests that Petrus Romanus does not represent a single pope, but two. The first would be Francis, the shepherd who reigns during tribulation, while the second would be a future Pope of Triumph, who would guide the remaining faithful in an era of restoration. This hypothesis would explain why Malachi's prophecy breaks the numbering after Benedict XVI, indicating that what follows is no longer part of the normal historical sequence, but rather a transitional time between judgment and renewal. The third and broadest interpretation goes beyond individual papal figures. In it, Petrus Romanus would not necessarily be a man, but a prophetic period, a phase in which the Church would face its definitive judgment. In this case, Francis would be the sign of the beginning of this tribulation, and the next pope, or popes, would face the consequences of this process. What will come next? Restoration or final ruin? If Francis was indeed Petrus Romanus in the fullest sense, then his departure could mark the beginning of the destruction of Rome foretold in the prophecy. But if he was merely the first stage, the shepherd of tribulation, then the next pope could be the one to lead the Church through chaos toward possible restoration. Some theologians anticipate an angelic pope, based on another prophecy attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, a holy leader who would reform the Church amid chaos. Others believe that before this, there would be a period of great trial, in which the very structure of the Church would be shaken to its core. What seems clear is that, regardless of which interpretation is correct, we are living in a decisive moment. The prophecies of Malachi, Guadalupe, and Garabandal converge on the same warning. The history of the Church and the world is entering a critical phase where the spiritual choices of each person and of the ecclesiastical hierarchy itself will have eternal consequences. The prophecy of Garabandal establishes a clear sequence: the warning, the miracle, and, if there is no conversion, the punishment, events yet to come. This suggests that the next pope will likely still be part of a context of trial, perhaps a more discreet pontiff, more faithful to tradition but also more persecuted, who will face even deeper crises within and outside the Church. The figure of the Pope of Triumph, however, seems to belong to a later moment after purification has occurred. Mystics and Scripture speak of a faithful remnant, not a church powerful in numbers or political influence, but a humble people, tested in suffering and steadfast in faith. It is from this small flock that the definitive shepherd will emerge, one who will not negotiate with the world, yield to syncretism, or compromise the truth for those who resist. This will be the true Petrus, Romanus in the fullest sense, not the Pope of tribulation, but the one who will guide the rebirth of the Church after the storm. What to expect from the next Pope? If the prophetic sequence is correct, it is likely that Francis's successor will not yet be the Pope of Triumph, but rather a leader who will face even more difficult times, perhaps a more conservative Pope, but also one more fiercely opposed, who will attempt to restore orthodoxy amid a divided Church. The true triumphant shepherd will only emerge after the great trial, when the faithful remnant is ready to receive him. In the meantime, Catholics must discern the signs of the times, remain steadfast in faith, and prepare for the events to come. For whatever the correct interpretation, one thing is certain: the Church is being tested, and the future will depend on the response of the faithful to this call to conversion. Thank you for watching this video. Leave your like and subscribe to the Living Hope channel on YouTube. Activate notifications by clicking on the bell to receive other publications.